so much. Thank you. Hello. My name is Elena Davis. I'd like to thank Professor Roy and the UCLA Department of Sociology for the honor of being here. I congratulate each and every one of you for having completed a fundamental part of your journey. Graduates, you and your families have arrived at one of life's intersections today. I too was at one of these intersections, both literally and figuratively, where I met a homeless woman, and in that instant, I was delivered a gift. My hope is that my words today will somehow affect each and every one of you like she did me. Being here with you all is a dream come true that exceeds anything that I would have ever dared dream for myself. And I thank you. I'm going to share my story with you today in 3 parts because it resonates with how I live my life, which also comes in 3 parts: God, family, and country. I'm one of 4 children raised on $3,000 a year in food stamps. I was raised by a single mother who grew up for much of her early childhood in an orphanage home. We led a very transient life. My mom always on the move, searching for a better life, always hoping the next town would be the one. Inevitably, the new place would somehow be worse than the place from which we had just come. My last year of formal education was the 8th grade, at which point I had already been to a dozen different schools in a dozen different cities. School for me, when I did attend, was accompanied by visceral terror. I was the perennial stranger. Sometimes we arrived in the middle of the school year. I was usually lost and couldn't catch up. I never learned how to multiply or divide. And it seemed that every lesson and every subject was being taught in a foreign language that everybody understood except me. My saving grace was my ability to read. For some odd reason, by the time I was 10 or 11, a voracious appetite for reading and writing had begun to emerge. I remember at one of the schools that I attended, I had taken a standardized test, and it was either the 6th or 7th grade, and I had scored at the college level in reading and comprehension. Otherwise, my highest grades ranged between a D and an F, and I even got an F in PE. And I don't know about you guys, but I think that's a talent in itself. Looking back, I can say that reading was absolutely my first love. Reading was empowering, and I was very drawn to an interesting collection of books that my mother had. Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Thomas Harris's I'm Okay, You're Okay. Wayne Dyer's Pulling Your Own Strings. Robert Ringer's Looking Out for Number 1. It would be years before the lessons from my mom's books would serve me, but the seeds had been planted. Now in retrospect, I can see I was getting an education. It just wasn't a traditional one. Unbeknownst to me at the time, I was learning how to access what I call my inner voice, which became the building blocks of what was to come and what I'm doing now. We didn't grow up in neighborhoods where you had a lemonade stand or mowed lawns or washed cars to make money. My unique education extended into whatever random jobs or chores were available or jobs that we were made to do, which were often dark and disturbing. For a time, we lived on an Indian reservation. I was 12. My responsibility was to feed and water the pit bulls and cocks that were bred for fighting. I refused to attend these fights, but I knew that the cocks fought with gaffs, their little razor blades that they attached to their heels. On the weekends, I sold cigarettes in a 10-foot by 10-foot plywood shack right next to a freeway in the middle of the desert. It was in that shack that my deficient math skills came to light. I was terrible at giving back correct change, which resulted in a whole lot of tourists getting a whole bunch of cigarettes at a bargain price. But the guy who owned the cocks and the pit bulls also owned the cigarette shack. So in my mind, it all evened out. At an early age, I made a conscious decision to promise to myself that I wasn't going to live my life like this forever. I didn't want to grow up to be like any of the people around me. I needed and craved sanity. I vowed that when I grew up, I wouldn't break the law or lie. I wouldn't cheat, steal, beat, or brutalize innocent children or animals. The irony is that my own values and boundaries were defined by growing up in a world without boundaries, a world of corruption, deceit, and exploitation. Most of my childhood was lived out in utter chaos with insanity as a side dish. Whether it was one of the environmental dangers or one of the many dangerous and predatory individuals that we were constantly exposed to, all I had to fall back on was my inner voice and my instincts. I took my share of beatings and abuse, but it was my inner voice that protected me and kept me from having my innocence or my life taken from me. I knew without a doubt that life held something better for me. I just didn't know what it was, and I had no way to prove it. I trusted an inexplicable knowingness that came from my inner voice telling me that something good wanted to find me as much as I wanted to find it. I also knew that nobody was going to hand it to me. I had clearly learned that from the self-help books. Nobody's going to do it for you. You have to do and create your life by yourself. I guess that's why they're called self-help. At 16, I found myself at one of life's intersections when I was presented with an opportunity to go to Paris, France to model. I didn't know where Paris, France was, nor did I care. Something so powerful resonated through me. I knew from deep inside that this was going to be my family's chance and way out, so I jumped at it. I promised my sister and brothers that I would work really hard and come home and share all of the money that I made with them. This would be our opportunity to live like normal people. We would finally be safe and live in a nice neighborhood where people didn't stab each other in domestic disputes. We would have good food to eat and be free of further exploitation. We would be happy. I boarded my flight with mixed feelings of fear, sadness, and anticipation. I had no idea where I was going or how to speak the language, and being separated from my siblings for a year felt like an eternity. But I had all that I needed to stay safe in Europe. I knew how to stay out of harm's way. I knew how to listen to my inner voice, allowing it to guide and protect me. Over the course of a year, I traveled to France, Italy, Germany, England, Northern Africa, Spain, and many other countries. I worked solidly for a year without ever knowing where on the globe any of the countries that I had lived in or traveled to were located. I had managed to maneuver winding, unmarked streets, traversing airports, train stations, hotels, and all of my go-sees and photo shoots without ever once getting lost or stranded. I was by myself, but I was never alone because I had my inner voice as my guide. I returned to LA briefly, and then at 18 years old, I moved to New York City to work for the Ford agency, and the rest, as they say, is history. By the time I was 25 years old, I owned a home and had 9 years of a very lucrative career under my belt. One night, shortly after my 25th birthday, my phone rang. It was a friend who wanted to fix me up with a very nice boy from a very nice family. She was positive that we would have a lot in common. His parents were having a dinner party that Thursday night for the Duchess of York, and she had already arranged for me to be his date. She said, "I think you're perfect for each other." After a really long pause on my part, I said two things. The first was, I can tell you we have nothing in common. And the second was, who's the Duchess of York? Little did I know I'd be introduced to my husband and the father of my children that night. In fact, today is our 17th wedding anniversary. Happy anniversary, Greg. It was also the night that I met my future father-in-law and someone who would become one of the most loved and influential people in my life. There was no segue. My father-in-law-to-be sat me down the night of my blind date with his son and launched straight into his questions. He asked what I did for a living. I told him I was a model. How much money did you make this year? I told him. Hey, that's pretty good, he said. How much money did you make last year? I told him. He then inquired as to whether I was paying my income taxes and how I was sheltering the money. He suggested I call his accounting department in the morning because they would be the best people to advise me. I informed him that I already had an accountant. With a warm smile, he looked at me and he said, "Mine are better. Call him in the morning." This all went down within the first 15 minutes of my being introduced. My father-in-law never knew the details of my background, only that I didn't come from very much. And by the way he treated me, it was clear that he didn't care. He just loved and accepted me. He invested in each relationship equally and offered advice, guidance, lots of great meals, and love. He personified and further connected me to my own values: love of family, God, country, and friends. 2 years after that dinner, Greg and I were married. Over the next 12 years, I was indoctrinated into a world that I never knew existed or dreamed of, and yet it was my life. Dining with presidents, kings and queens, celebrities, athletes, and superstars. My life had become a fairy tale, and all I had to do was to keep secret the fact that I came from the underbelly of society, a nobody from nowhere raised around what all of society considers to be the lowest of the low. That didn't seem to be a tall order at the time. Then one day, everything changed. It didn't actually happen in a day. It happened in a breath. I had no idea how powerful a single breath could be. It was the day the person I had come to love and respect more than any other person I had ever known died. My father-in-law passed away on September 25th, 2004, and so did I. My father-in-law's death marked the beginning of a dark night of the soul for me. He was the glue that held everything and everyone in their place, and now the glue was gone, as was his love, light, and larger-than-life energy. The level of pain and grief that I experienced was worse than if somebody had cut off my leg. I had blithely stepped into a fairy tale life, where I felt secure as never before, and I didn't have to think about a thing. In fact, it was all so perfect that I no longer needed my inner voice. I had turned my back on it because I was safe and I had everything that I could ever want. The self-help books I had read as a child were an irretrievable memory, and they provided no solace for my grief. I couldn't understand what life wanted from me. I'd been raised on a solid diet of struggle and adversity, but nothing compared to the pain of losing the one person who had been unconditionally kind to me and taught me so much. But none of what I wanted seemed to matter anymore. Unbeknownst to me at the time, this was a turning point in my life, another intersection. And I would learn something the self-help books left out. I am neither author nor navigator of my life. 18 months and 18 pounds later, still grieving, I happened to catch the tail end of a Maria Shriver interview on either the Today or Good Morning America show. And she was talking about Joseph Campbell and had quoted him as saying to follow your bliss. Hearing those words was the beginning of a recovery and a reconnection to my inner voice. My husband, in an attempt to help me gain clarity, asked what following my bliss meant to me. I heard my inner voice speak for the first time in a long time, and it said, drive. So that's what I did. I got into a car and I drove and I didn't stop. It had been 15 years since I bothered to listen, but it had never left. It had been waiting for me to tune back in so it could tell me to go home. So that's what I did. I started traveling back to the types of poor neighborhoods and people that I came from. I photographed a 13-year-old girl with her baby, visited shelters, and photographed individuals returning the prints for them to keep. I was lovingly taught by one fellow how to find things in a dumpster that were still of value. By manipulating a clothes hanger into a fishing pole, these worthy items were easily retrieved, avoiding a trip into the dumpster. This made me happier than watching Barbra Streisand serenade Bill Clinton at a small dinner party. Often I was questioned as to why someone like me wanted to hang out and photograph people like them. My short answer to that question is, I am them. Which brings me to the beginning of the end of my story. All roads led me to an intersection in Houston. It was nearly 2 years ago now, a little more actually. I was on my way to pick up my children from school when a homeless woman in an intersection stopped me and asked for water. I rolled down my car window to hand her the water that she had requested, and I realized, while I had never met her before, I had known her my whole life. As I pulled away from the intersection, watching the woman grow smaller and smaller in my rearview mirror, a fire lit up inside of me. That fire has become I Am Water's foundation. I'm the founder and president of a nonprofit organization that distributes bottled water to the American homeless. Inscribed on each bottle are words of inspiration, words such as love, faith, dream, hope, and peace. By the end of this summer, I Am Water's foundation will have delivered nearly 500,000 bottles of water to people right here in our own country, people who don't have access to life's most basic necessity, clean, safe drinking water. Many Americans cannot imagine not having access to something so basic as drinking water. Those who lack access to water often lack another taken for granted necessity: respect. And as important, if not more so, words that give them a sense of belonging. We know through the results of our survey research data conducted here through your very own Department of Sociology at UCLA, that when the homeless are made aware that these special bottles are made expressly for them, it gives them a sense of belonging. It makes them feel that God or someone knows that they are there, that they exist, and they are not invisible. It is the mission of I Am Water's foundation to physically and spiritually hydrate those who live on the margins of society, who have lost hope and a connection to their inner voice. They are also valuable, important people with gifts to deliver. In closing, I wish to congratulate each and every one of you on receiving your diploma today. I am truly respectful and honored to be here with you all. I cannot imagine the level of work that goes into such an extraordinary accomplishment. In addition to the education that you received from this fine university, you must not forget you have otherworldly gifts to deliver that are uniquely yours. You all have your degrees in the same field, but no two will apply them in the same way. You may think you know how your life is going to unfold. You may have already made plans and decisions based on what you think will happen. And others may be trying to figure out what they want to do when they grow up. I stand here at this juncture in your intersection, challenging you to keep one thing in mind as you leave. Be open to your moments of opportunity. Listen to your inner voice and your heart. It will guide you and do a better job than most of your everyday, run-of-the-mill thinking, because it is infinitely wiser. Life has meaning and purpose, and neither you or I have all the answers. We can only remain open and trusting and allow our inner voice to guide us. As Joseph Campbell said, when you follow your bliss, doors will open where you would not have thought there would be doors, and where there wouldn't be a door for anybody else. Thank you, and God bless.